Well, good evening, everyone. It's Congressman Jay Obernolte. We are live from my office here in Washington, D.C., and this is our telephone town hall. This is a format that's been really a popular way of communicating with my constituents. If you're not familiar, or if this is your first one, let me explain a little bit about the format. This is very similar to a radio talk show. So I'm going to give you an update on what's going on in Washington, D.C. over the last couple of months since our last town hall. And then we're going to open it up for questions, and what you'll be able to do at any time, including starting right now. If you have a question you'd like to ask, you can press *3 on your telephone, and that will connect you to one of my staff members who will take your information, note your question, and put you in the queue. And then we're just going to go through in order and answer those questions at the end. So *3 at any time, you can do that. Also, let me put in a plug for our newsletter. We do a newsletter about once a week. We try and be very thoughtful, not to waste people's time. We would talk about the things that we think a majority of my constituents in the 8th Congressional District will be interested in. And it's a really good way of communicating with my office and getting information about what's going on in Washington. So if you would like to subscribe to my newsletter at any time during this telephone town hall, you can press *6. So remember, *3 at any time to ask a question, *6 at any time to subscribe to our newsletter. So thank you for joining our telephone town hall. I want to start talking about the December jobs report and the statistics that were released just a couple of weeks ago from the Department of Labor. If you have been tuning into my telephone town halls last year, you know that I am very concerned about the federal budget. I sit on the House Budget Committee. I was vice chair of the Budget Committee in the California State Legislature for 5 years, and my doctorate is in public budgeting. So budgeting is something that really is in my wheelhouse that I'm very concerned about. And we have been raising alarms about the level of federal spending over the last 2 years. Over the last 24 months, we have roughly doubled the normal level of federal spending. And all of that spending has been deficit financed, meaning it adds to our national debt. And the reason why we've been so concerned about it is that economists all the way along have been telling us that deficit government spending of that level is dangerously inflationary. And unfortunately, those fears came to fruition in the last half of last year. And we just now have the report from the Department of Labor for just the month of December. And it is truly alarming. Inflation increased in December at the highest rate in 40 years. The year-to-year increase in inflation was about 7%. And I'll tell you a couple of things that are even more alarming about that. That 7% is a very high rate of inflation, but that is the consumer price index, which means that it is a lagging indicator of inflation. It tells us when inflation has already occurred. If you want a leading indicator of inflation that will tell us when inflation might occur in the future, you look to other indexes, for example, the producer price index, which tracks the price of the raw materials that manufacturers use to produce finished goods. We call that the PPI. The PPI for the month of December increased at a rate of 10% compared with the year before. And that is a leading indicator of inflation because as manufacturers build finished goods based on those raw materials that were purchased at higher prices, they're going to have to bake those increased prices into the price they charge for their finished goods in the future. So what that means in layman terms is inflation is not transitory, as unfortunately we have been told by a number of the members of the administration. It is here to stay, and I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. Equally alarming in the December statistics was an analysis of real wage growth. So wages, obviously, if you get a raise, that's a good thing. That means your wages have gone up. But real wages measures your wages compared with inflation. So inflation was up 7% last year, but wages were only up 4%. Then obviously real wage growth was negative. And that's actually exactly what the Department of Labor has confirmed occurred last year. Real wages declined in 10 of the last 12 months. And on a year-to-year basis, last year they were down by about 2.4%. So I find that deeply, deeply alarming because it means that on average, our workers are losing ground. That means that the dollars that they work for are not buying as much as they did in previous years. That means that a larger and larger percentage of them are going to slide out of the middle class towards poverty, and the people that are in poverty are going to slide further and further down that slope, and it's going to be more and more difficult to get people out of poverty the more negative this wage growth is. I mean, it really illustrates the fact that when inflation is caused through government action, as this round of inflation clearly is, it represents an unseen tax that's paid by every American because we pay it every time we go to the grocery store, every time we go to the gas pump to put gas in our car to drive to work, every time we pay a utility bill, we are paying that government tax. And that's something that we need to get our fiscal house in order. And that's the only way to stop this from occurring. Equally alarming is the fact that the Federal Reserve in their last couple of meetings has been talking about raising interest rates as a way to combat inflation. Obviously, that's really one of the primary tools that the Fed has to try and stop the growth of inflation. But unfortunately, that's also going to raise the cost of paying back all of this money that the federal government has borrowed that caused the inflationary problem in the future. So ironically, as we raise inflation rates, it's going to make it more and more difficult to pay down the national debt and more difficult to get out of this deficit spending hole that we found ourselves in. So the really kind of bad news from the Department of Labor for last year that we're just now learning about. But certainly, I hope that this represents a call to action for all of my colleagues here in Congress to try and get this federal deficit spending under control and tame inflation and prevent it from happening in the future, because it's a really regressive, unseen tax that affects every single one of us. If you're just joining us, let me welcome you to our telephone town hall. I'm Congressman Jay Obernolte. This has been a really successful format for us. Actually, we started these telephone town halls in the depths of the pandemic when it really wasn't safe to have in-person town halls. But what we found is that people find it a very valuable way of connecting. So despite the fact that we held 17 in-person town halls in the last year, we're going to continue holding these town halls because people have told us they find them so valuable. So as a reminder, if you would like to ask a question, then you can press *3 on your telephone at any time during the telephone town hall, including right now, and one of my staff members will take your information and put you in queue. If you would like to sign up for my newsletter at any time, please press *6, and one of my staff members will come on and take your information, and we will get you all signed up. So we'll get on to the next thing I want to talk about, which is impact aid. So one of the things I'm really concerned about is the amount of learning loss that we are seeing in our public education system as a direct result of the pandemic. And I fear that we are going to spend an entire generation making up for the several years of learning loss that we're seeing in our school system. And unfortunately, this learning loss is disproportionately impacting the children in our school system that were the furthest behind before. They're the most difficult children to reach, and unfortunately, they have been the first to start to suffer as a result of this learning loss. We feel learning loss particularly acutely in the 8th Congressional District because of the way that our schools are funded. A lot of people don't realize this, but most public school systems in the K-12 system in California get their funding from predominantly two sources: property tax revenue and funding from the state of California. That affects us in the 8th Congressional District because over 90% of our land mass is publicly owned of one form or another, either National Forest or a Bureau of Land Management or other forms of public trust. Over 90% of that land is publicly owned. That affects our schools because if you're relying on property tax revenue, government doesn't pay property tax on government-owned land. So if you're a school district that's surrounded by BLM land or national forest, then you're really constrained on your ability to collect property tax revenue. So there's a federal program to combat the effects of that called impact aid that I've long been a champion of. But unfortunately, the payments from impact aid have not kept pace with the loss of revenue that our school districts have experienced over the last couple of years. So I'm really glad to be fighting for two bills that are pending in the House of Representatives this year. They're the Advancing Towards Impact Aid Full Funding Act and the Supplemental Impact Aid Flexibility Act. And together, those bills will give our school districts some more flexibility on how they collect and spend impact aid revenue, as well as bringing those payments up to a level that really recognizes the responsibility that the federal government has to compensate these school districts for the loss of tax revenue as a result of the federal lands that are in their district. So I'm hopeful that we're going to get those through the House of Representatives this year, and hopefully that's going to be a big win for us in Congressional District 8. So as a reminder, if you have a question about that or anything that we've discussed, you can press *3 at any time, and one of my staff members will come on the line and take your information and put you in queue to ask a question. Also, let me put a pitch for following us on social media. If obviously, if you're here listening to our telephone town hall, then you're civically engaged, and I commend you for doing that. But if you don't already, I'd encourage you to take the next step. Follow us on social media, whatever your platform of choice is: Facebook, Twitter, Parler, Rumble. We're on all of them, and you can follow us, and we give you more or less daily updates on what's going on in DC, and I hope you find that very helpful. One other thing that I wanted to talk about that has really been on my heart lately is the increase in fentanyl deaths that have been occurring in our community. I subscribe to all of the local newspapers, and I am very sad to say that it is a rare day that there isn't an article or a post somewhere in one of our papers about another young person that was killed by an overdose of fentanyl in our community. And usually it's someone that aren't hardcore drug users. They got introduced to something like oxycodone. That's what they thought they were taking, and they get something that's laced with fentanyl, and they don't realize it. It's very easy to overdose on. Here's a statistic that I think should be deeply alarming to everybody. The San Bernardino County Sheriff has tallied the increase in fentanyl deaths, and in the last 2 years, they have gone up from 30 to 277. So that's an over 600% increase in fentanyl-related deaths in our community. And a lot of people have been asking me, so why is this occurring, and what can we do to stop it? And unfortunately, this is it's not something that's just happening in our district or in San Bernardino County or Inyo County or Mono County. It's happening all throughout the country, but particularly in the state of California. And it has to do with our proximity to the border, the international border with Mexico. Although our community and our congressional district is not a border district, we are fairly close to the district, and so we are affected by what happens at the border. And there has been an incredible change in border security over the last 12 months, and not in a good way. We have new statistics for the month of December that show that we have about 3 times as much apprehensions at the border as we did in 2020. In December, we set a new record, almost 180,000 enforcement encounters just at the southern border. So a couple of months ago, I took a trip down to the border. I talked with the Border Patrol trying to figure out what was going on there. And what they've told me is that it's been changes in federal policy that have directly resulted in the problem. The incoming administration ended the Remain in Mexico program. They reinstituted the catch and release program, where if people are caught illegally crossing, they're released here in the United States rather than being deported back to where they came from, pending their court hearing. It's really resulted in this influx of not only immigrants but also fentanyl and human trafficking, and most of the immigration trade is unfortunately controlled by the Mexican drug cartels, and the San Bernardino County Sheriff says that that's where that fentanyl is coming from. In fact, we have a law enforcement group called the Inland Regional Narcotics Enforcement Team, who seized almost 800 pounds of fentanyl last year. That's a street value of about $26 million. They also report that they responded to 106 fentanyl-related calls, 108 victims, and 97 deaths in that time. Unfortunately, that the fentanyl seizures at the border are up over 100%, and that's just what was seized. I mean, obviously, we're seeing a huge influx in fentanyl that's coming into our community. So, law enforcement is absolutely unanimous in their opinion that the crisis at the southern border is what's catalyzing this problem, and that the number one thing that we need to do to fix it is to end that crisis. And I'm going to continue to push in Congress for common sense solutions to do that. And this is what I emphasize to people is that this is not a partisan issue. It doesn't matter if which side of the political spectrum you're on, we should all be able to agree that border security is important for us as a nation, and that our communities have a vested interest in controlling the substances that come across that border. We're continuing to push in Congress to try and come up with those solutions. Again, if you're just joining us, I'm Congressman Jay Obernolte, and welcome to our telephone town hall. If you have a question, as a reminder, anytime during this town hall, you can just press *3 on your phone. One of my staff members will take your information and will put you in queue to get your question answered. And also, you can, at any time, press *6 on your phone to sign up for our newsletter, which is really the best way of staying informed about what's going on with my office and in Washington, D.C. One last thing I wanted to talk about before we open it up for questions is a bill that I introduced last week. And this is a bill that is very personally meaningful to me. Several weeks ago, on February 19th, the United States celebrated a very painful milestone, 80 years since the issuance of the executive order that ordered mandatory confinement of Japanese Americans during World War II. This was at the beginning of the war, when there was a lot of anti-immigrant and anti-foreign feeling in the United States. And unfortunately, as a nation, it's agreed universally now, we overreacted. And the president issued an executive order that required Japanese Americans to move out of their houses into internment camps, where they spent the rest of the war. And in many cases, this was mothers and fathers who had children that were serving in American military. So they had their children were off overseas serving their country, and they were regarded as potentially hostile aliens forced to move out of their home into essentially what were concentration camps. We have in the 8th Congressional District a very personal connection to this, because the best preserved of these internment camps is located here. If you haven't been up there, it's the Manzanar Relocation Center. It's in Inyo County. It's kind of outside of, in between Lone Pine and Independence. It's an amazing trip if you have an occasion to go there. But it's the best preserved of these camps, and will really give you an idea of, number one, how remote these camps were, the extreme conditions that these Americans were asked to live under, the hardships that they endured, and the discrimination and the loss of their liberties that they were subjected to. This is something that has a deep connection not only to me, but also to the 8th Congressional District. So the bill that I introduced last week, H.R. 6434, will create a new history network within the national park system to tie these different relocation sites together and raise awareness of the sites within our national park system that people can go and visit and learn for themselves really the horrors of what went on in these camps. It's something that we have done for other sites in the national park system. We have a network for Underground Railroad. We have a network for the civil rights sites. We have a network for Reconstruction era sites, and my bill would add a network for these Japanese American internment sites. So people would be able to go on the National Park website. There'd be raised awareness of where these sites are, the status of them, and which ones you can go visit. This is something that I think is going to not only raise awareness of the sites themselves, but hopefully raise awareness of the actions and the history of our country, and hopefully prevent anything like that from ever occurring again in the future. So that's something that I'm deeply personally emotional about. And really happy, actually, that we've gotten a lot of traction with that. We've been fast-tracked. We have a hearing on that bill this week. It's on Thursday here in the House of Representatives in the Natural Resources Committee, which is a committee I sit on. We've gotten broad bipartisan support for it, and I am cautiously optimistic that we're going to be able to get that through. This is kind of very unusual that a bill would get a hearing so quickly. So certainly appreciate your support on that as we go into hearing this week, but I wanted to let you know what we've been working on along those lines. So that's wraps it up for what I wanted to say in my part of the program. We're going to go to questions here. Again, as a reminder, if you have a question for me on anything I've spoken about or anything that I haven't talked about, please press *3 on your phone. That'll connect you to one of my staff members who will take your information and put you in the queue. And press *6 at any time to subscribe to our newsletter. So we're going to go. Oh, look, we've got lots of people in queue. That's great. Thank you for your engagement. We're going to go to a question from Grace from Hesperia. Grace, go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, Congressman. Good evening. Thank you for taking my question. You kind of answered it already, but one of my top concerns is the drugs that are coming across the border and the rise in fentanyl deaths. And I wanted to know what was being done to secure our border.
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, it's something that's a big problem for our district. I would say the number one thing is to change the federal policies back to the ones that were working before this crisis was created. And that means going back to the Remain in Mexico policy, which means that if you're seeking asylum here, you must wait on the Mexico side of the border while your case is adjudicated. And then when you get clearance to proceed, then you can come across the border. And then we need to reinstitute the Remain in Mexico policy, where if you're caught crossing the border illegally, you're deported back to where you came from rather than being released back here in the United States. When they release you here in the United States, they're supposed to issue you a citation with a court date. But what the Border Patrol told me a couple of months ago is that they've run out of court dates because our court system is so backlogged. And so they're asking people to give them their address in the United States so that they can, when a court date becomes available in the future, then mail them the citation. That's how ridiculous it's gotten. But then the other thing that we can do is just to finish construction on that border wall. And, again, I don't see this as a partisan issue. We should all be able to agree that border security is important. Countries across the globe have recognized this. When I was down at the border a couple of months ago, I saw uncompleted parts of the wall with the materials to complete them sitting in a pile, rusting next to the wall with a hole in it. And right across from where we were standing there on the border was this bustling city of Tijuana. So, you can imagine the challenge that the Border Patrol has in policing this barrier. And it's just such an easy problem to solve. And I regret that it's gotten so politicized because it really shouldn't be. But thank you, Grace, for the question. It was a great one. Next question is from Michael in Crestline. I skipped one. Greg, from Greg in Pinion Hills. Greg, what can I answer for you?
Oh, hi. Am I on?
Okay. I guess this is Michael.
It's a little.
Okay.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead with your question, Michael.
Oh, thanks, Congressman, for all your support for veterans activities too in our outreach program at Arenda House. The question is a little dark, but I thought you could handle it. Why do you think that the military suicides are not plateauing? Why are they such a intractable sort of problem and not plateauing? They're peaking again.
Right. It's a great question. It's such an important problem for us to solve. And I would say that I put the blame on our federal government in large part. And let me tell you why. First of all, if you look at what a disaster some of our foreign policy has been over the last several decades, you can see why our service members that are leaving the service are having such difficulty. I volunteer for an organization called the Veterans Airlift Command, and we provide free medical transportation, air transportation to veterans that need medical care. And I can't tell you how many veterans of Afghanistan, Iraq, and Iran and related places that I have flown that came back with deep physical and psychological scars from having served in those places. I think that the way that the pullout out of Afghanistan was handled last year was a travesty. I think it was incredibly disrespectful to the people that served over there, and I think that that's kind of exacerbated the problem. I also think that we don't do a good enough job in supporting the people that come back from those places and then subsequently leave the military. And that's something I've been fighting for here in Congress, is to put better support systems in place for those veterans. A lot of people don't realize that we have a unique exposure to that in Congressional District 8. We have one of the highest concentration of veterans anywhere in the country just because of the wide variety of different bases that we have here. We've got Fort Irwin, we've got 29 Palms, we've got China Lake, we've got the Marine base in Bridgeport. We've got the Marine Logistics base in Barstow. And then we have a lot of retired people from the former George Air Force Base and a lot of people that work at Edwards that live in the 8th Congressional District. So lots of veterans here, lots of need here. And I think that we in the federal government need to do a better job at supporting them. And let me give you one great example that relates directly to mental health. And that's the fact that the VA is a completely dysfunctional organization that really, in a lot of ways, fails to meet the medical and the mental needs of our veterans. In particular, one thing that I've been pushing for is expansion of a pilot program that we have that would allow veterans to seek private health care and get reimbursed by the VA instead of having to go to VA services. And the reason that's so important is just the vastness of our district. It's ridiculous. And this is a real life example. I've got veterans in Needles that the VA tells them, oh, take the bus if you can get one and come to Loma Linda to get your medical care when they could just drive across the bridge to Bullhead City and get that care privately. And by the way, at a lower expense than the care that the VA provides. So sorry for the rambling answer, but this is something that I'm very concerned about and deeply involved in. Thanks for the question, though, and thanks for highlighting the issue. All right, so we've got a question from Greg in Pinion Hills. Greg, what can I answer for you?
Yeah, back to your subject of the border wall. I work for the government, and waste, fraud, and abuse is a very real thing in our government. And I see all those materials that you were talking about as that form of, or one form of waste. And I was wondering why we can't utilize those materials and give them to the states that are trying to do something that are being abused by that. And so I wanted to get your thoughts and opinion of that and why our president can waste funds, but other government workers cannot.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question, and the various states have been very different in their responses to this situation. There have been other states, such as Texas, that have taken a much more active role in border security. And in fact, if you look at Texas, there are sections of the Texas wall that the state of Texas has taken it on itself to build a state wall, essentially, because they accuse the federal government of shirking their responsibility under the Constitution to provide national border security for border states. So, that's a much more proactive stance than the state of California has taken, which is basically, to actively they actively fought against the previous administration and their attempt to construct that border wall. And it just goes back to the fact that of how politicized this whole issue has been. And again, I don't think it should be. I don't think it needs to be. I don't think it's a partisan issue. I think we should all be able to agree that border security is important and it's something that's critical to protecting our communities. But excellent question. Thank you, Greg. Let's see, Mary from Trona. What question can I answer for you, Mary?
Yes, my question is this. We just recently, they did a change with the Medicare and Medi-Cal for insurance companies to help out. Well, since they did this, in our county, we're in San Bernardino County, and the nearest place for us to go to is Kern County, which is 30 miles away. Well, none of the insurance companies would cover it. And so now we are looking at not having any insurance, either in Medicare or Medi-Cal. I don't want to go 60 miles to get their care. We can't even go to urgent care over there in Ridgecrest, it's 30 miles away.
Yep. No, that's a great point. This is something that I have been fighting against for the last 7 years. I think it is completely unconscionable to tell people, many of whom are my constituents, to tell them, you have medical coverage, you have Medi-Cal, you have Medicare, but then you go to actually use it and discover that there are no providers. And you're not alone. I mean, I know that the Trona, is one of the more remote places in my district, but there are many places that are having exactly that same problem. And the problem is twofold. First of all, the Medi-Cal reimbursement rates are so low for doctors that the only way to stay in business if you have a doctor's office that accepts Medi-Cal is to have a very large practice. And that might be possible in places like Los Angeles and San Francisco and San Diego, but it's not possible in more sparsely populated places like the 8th Congressional District. And so what happens is that is that we don't have access to healthcare. We don't have doctors that are easy to get to. And as you say, you've got to drive all the way into Kern, probably all the way to Bakersfield, just to get someone who accepts your insurance. That is unacceptable. At the very least, we need to recognize the disparity in the cost of providing medical care to people in lower populated districts like ours, and be able to bring our coverage back up to being on par with other counties that have better infrastructure. But we also have a problem with the number of doctors that we have in general. So one of the things that I've been working on is trying to get more people into the medical care field. And that's why I've co-sponsored a bill here in Congress that would expand some educational loan forgiveness to doctors who practice in our communities that are underserved in California. It's called the Stopping Doctor Shortages Act. That I'm a co-sponsor of that bill, and hopefully that will kind of get some more doctors in there. But I think in general, the only way to fix this problem is to recognize the inequities that exist between our counties and counties that are more urban, where it's easier to have a practice that can accept those low reimbursement rates. But it's a great question. Thank you for highlighting the problem, Mary. Let's see. We've got Christopher from Barstow. Christopher, what can I answer for you?
Yes, sir. And hello, Congressman. I understand that the tax on gas pays for road repair, but is there a way you can lower it? I mean, like, I know police don't pull over people going too slow on the freeway, but that's a law if they're going too slow and not passing. Use me for an example. I work out in Fort Irwin, and it's minimum 45-minute drive there and 45-minute drive back. It's starting to hurt my family by me not being able to provide like I used to. Do you have any plan to help with this?
Sure. That's a great question. Thanks for highlighting the issue, too. This is something that I've been fighting, a battle I've been fighting for the last 7 years. I was one of the leaders of the opposition to the increase in the gas tax in California a couple of years ago. And the point that we wanted to make to everybody is that we all recognize the need to maintain our streets and highways. The problem is that such a large percentage of gas tax revenue is diverted to uses that have nothing to do with roads and highways. I'm talking about things like mass transit. And, before anyone gets mad, I used to serve when I was in local government on the board of directors of a transit authority. So I know a lot about mass transit, but let me tell you this, it should not be funded out of gas tax revenue. Gas tax revenue is for building and maintaining roads, not paying for buses and trains. And this last round of gas tax increases was particularly egregious because if you look at the allowed uses for it, it could go through things like urban parks. So responding to the pollution created by cars was amongst the allowable uses of this money. So not to say that I'm not a fan of urban parks, I'm just saying that there are lots of other different sources of revenue that are more appropriate to that. And the consequence of that is the one that you highlighted, which is that in our congressional district, many, many people rely on their vehicles to put food on their table for their families. We've got a large population that lives in the high desert and commutes over the 15 and the Cajon Pass every day to Los Angeles and back to work. And so paying a dime or a quarter more a gallon has a serious impact on tens of thousands of my constituents. The governor, bless his heart, just announced that he would not implement yet another round of increases in the gas tax that was scheduled to phase in this year. He's going to put that off, but it's definitely going to come, and it's going to have a real impact on us. In inflation, of course, factors into that too. The price for gasoline this year is about 50% higher than it was just a year ago. So, this is a serious issue. So, that's my response to people who talk about the gas tax is that I support government maintenance of roads and bridges. I don't support using that revenue to things that have nothing to do with the purposes for which it was collected. So it's a serious problem. Oh, so I am being told we're going to go to a poll, and we're going to run two of these polls during our telephone town hall here. And this is one that we just encourage everyone. Everyone can participate just with with the numbers on your telephone. So here's the question: speaking about what we were talking about the national debt, the size of government, and federal spending, do you support new government social spending programs that would add to the national debt in the long term? So press 1 if you think, yes, we need to expand the scope of the federal government and the services that it provides. Press 2 if you think, no, we should lower federal spending and reduce the national debt, or you can press 3 if you are unsure. So the question again, do you support new social spending programs that will add to the national debt in the long term? Press 1 if yes, we need to expand the scope of the federal government. Press 2 if you think no, we should lower federal spending and reduce the national debt. Press 3 if you think something else or if you're unsure. So we'll publish the results of that survey in our next newsletter. I always find those responses fascinating. All right, we're going to go back to the phones for our questions. Just as a reminder, if you have a question that I haven't answered, press *3 on your phone, and one of my staff members will take your information and put you in the queue. If you would like to sign up for our newsletter, you can always press *6, and we'll take down your information and get you all hooked up. So going back to the phones, Douglas from Yucaipa, what can I answer for you?
Yes, sir. Thank you for taking my call. I live in Yucaipa. I'm retired. I enjoy living in California. My concern is I was unaware that I guess Newsom had put together a proposal for Assembly Bill 1400, which amounts to a single-payer healthcare system in the state of California. You can sense the direction that he's trying to move our state, and obviously with a lot of illegal aliens and people here that are uninsured, I know that that's going to apply to those people that are here illegally. My question is your thoughts on Assembly Bill 1400, and I believe it was voted out or voted down, so it didn't go through. Secondly, the gubernatorial election is coming up in November. What are your thoughts on that? Where are we going? How are we going to change California into a GOP state? I'd like your answers on that. Thank you.
All right, great. So talking about Assembly Bill 1400, I mean, obviously I'm no longer a member of the legislature. I'm now your representative in the House of Representatives, but I do liaise very frequently with our state representatives. AB 1400, that was not an effort by the governor. That was Ash Kalra was the author of that bill. And this is not the first time that this has been tried in the legislature. I was one of the leaders of the opposition to the last time this was tried in the legislature. And, I think it's important to talk about the fact that we all believe that everyone ought to have access to quality health care that they can afford. Everybody believes that. The problem is that going to single payer in California would require roughly a doubling in the amount of state tax revenue. It would require hundreds of billions of dollars of additional revenue a year. And to the people who say, well, that would still be less than what we spend currently. Well, no, it would not be. And the Legislative Analyst Office has weighed in on this. There have been detailed financial calculations done. It would be a huge expansion, not just of the government, the authority of state government, but also of the cost of providing those services. So I feel strongly that's not the way to go about it. I think that our healthcare system has some problems. We need more free market transparency. We need more price transparency. We need to do something about pharmaceutical pricing. But on the whole, we provide some of the highest quality healthcare in the world, and it's not worth throwing that away to try and provide a government option. You asked about the status. So AB 1400 actually was never brought up for a vote. The author, Assemblyman Kalra, withdrew it because he did not have the votes to pass it. And that's angered a lot of people, actually, not just the people that, it's people like me who are glad that it's not moving forward. It's also angered the people who wanted to see it move forward, who are disappointed that their representatives weren't put on record of whether or not they supported something like that. So some interesting transparency and governance arguments going on there. To your larger question, I don't. I represent people from all different walks of life, from all different political parties. I try not to make these town halls political. I've not endorsed in the gubernatorial election, but it's going to be an interesting time in California. We have not just the governor, but a wide variety of different state and local races that I encourage everyone to get very involved in. And this is what I tell people: is go vote your values. It's been written famously that we deserve the government that we vote for. And if you're not willing to do your research, figure out who's running for various offices, and vote for your values, then we deserve the government that we get. So please, everyone, let's be civically engaged. It's sometimes we're going to disagree. Sometimes we're going to vote for different candidates, but let's all make informed decisions. Let's all respect each other's point of view, and let's vote our values in November. And then I think that level of civil engagement is what's required to take us from where we are as a society to where we need to be. But thank you very much for the question. It was a great one. All right, going back to the queue here, Nick and Julie from Apple Valley. What can I answer for you?
Hi, thank you for taking our call. We want to talk about Ukraine. We understand that it's important strategically and morally. However, we're highly opposed to the fact that they want to send troops over to defend the sovereignty of Ukraine when we need to send those troops down to defend the sovereignty of our own border.
Sure, great question. Go ahead. Do you have a follow-on to that? Julie, are you still there?
Yes.
Okay, was that it or was there more?
Well, can we put the troops on our border and not theirs?
No. So great issue to highlight in Ukraine. And I 100% agree with you. I've told you about the work that I do with veterans who are wounded in Afghanistan and Iraq. And I don't want to be sitting here 10 years, 20 years from now, flying troops of ours that were injured in Ukraine. So I am 100% opposed to sending our men and women in uniform over there to fight a foreign war. However, I do think it is very necessary to deter Russia's territorial aggression in Ukraine. But fortunately, we live in a more modern world now where wars are more often fought through economics than through military action. And we certainly have the tools to be able to do that. So I am very much in favor of economic sanctions against Russia should it violate the territorial integrity of Ukraine. And I think it's extremely important that we draw a line in the sand there with Russia, because just waiting in the wings is China. And I'm sure President Xi is watching with great interest to see what Russia can get away with, because if Russia gets away with invading Ukraine, then I am almost 100% certain that we will see aggression with China towards Taiwan. And that will be a foreign conflict that will be much more difficult for us to avoid getting entangled in, because Taiwan is a much closer and more important political and economic ally of the United States. And so that's my big fear, is that if we allow Mr. Putin to get away with expansion into Ukraine, we're going to catalyze an incursion of China into Taiwan, and that's what's going to draw us into another worldwide conflict. And that's the last thing that I want for my children. So thanks very much for that question. All right, going to, is it Sandy from Victorville? Sandy, what can I answer for you?
Yep. Okay, I have a question. I'm under the impression that the Supreme Court ruled that Biden had to abide by the Remain in Mexico policy. He is not. And I'm wondering why nobody's holding this guy accountable when he's supposed to be doing that, if in fact that's the case.
Well, I mean, that's a concern of mine also, and I would dispute anyone that characterized it as no one's holding him accountable, because we are all trying to hold him accountable. But this is, part of the clash that exists sometimes between the legislative and the executive branches of government, and the legal questions that arise over just how much authority a federal administration has to enact policy on their own through executive order, and how much of that authority gets usurped away from the legislative branch and the laws that Congress writes. So the administration is challenging that court ruling. They do not agree with the court ruling, so we're going to continue fighting on that. In the meantime, we are questioning a number of different things that are currently being done with respect to federal policy, especially as regards to our southern border. One thing I'm very concerned about is reports that we have that detained immigrants are being bussed into various communities across the country. That's something that should never be done outside of consultation with the authorities of the state and the communities that are going to be affected by that. So I've co-sponsored legislation to try and put an end to that, try and see if to the degree to which it is occurring, and demand some transparency from the administration on that. And we will continue to push for the restoration of the proven policies that we know work with respect to the southern border. And again, I mean, there's no political animosity here. This shouldn't be a partisan issue. Border security is something that's critical to our national security and our identity as a country, and it's something that we need to enforce. So thank you very much for the question. We're going to have our second poll question of the evening here. So get your phones ready to press a button here. So the question is this: to address our nation's broken immigration system, we must work to press 1 if you believe the answer is secure the border and crack down on trafficking and illegal entries. Press 2 if you believe we should implement mandatory e-verify to check worker status. Press 3 if you believe we should provide amnesty for undocumented immigrants. Press 4 if you believe we enforce the Remain in Mexico policy. Press 5 for other or unsure. So again, to address our nation's broken immigration system, we must work to, and let me be clear, because I mean, if it was me, I would say, well, I want to press a couple of these buttons. Pick the one that you feel the most strongly about. So press 1 if you think we need to secure the border and crack down on trafficking and illegal entries. Press 2 if you think we should implement mandatory e-verify to check worker status. Press 3 if you think we should provide amnesty for undocumented immigrants. Press 4 if you think we should enforce the Remain in Mexico policy. Press 5 if for other and unsure. And again, we will share the results of the survey in our next newsletter. And you can sign up for our newsletters by pressing *6 on your phone. And we'll take down your information and get you all hooked up. Right, going back to the phone lines here. Sandy from Victorville. Oh, we already did it. We already did Sandy. Okay, how about Mary from Big Bear? Mary, what can I answer for you?
Congressman Obernolte, when you were speaking about bills that were being introduced to try and help fund the schools, which they desperately needed, I know this from volunteering for many years in the local Big Bear area schools, but the funding isn't that there is a problem with the way the schools are getting funded. Specifically, I have an immediate family member that was the accountant for a very large school district in LA County. And she told me, and this is a first-person account, because I'd visited her at her office a few times, that every time they get a lottery check from the state, and those lottery checks come to schools from all over the country. There are lotteries that were sold to the voters to approve them because that money was supposed to go to the school. It's true. The money goes to the school. And then as soon as she gets the check and it gets deposited, she has to write a check to the state of California. Money that had to be given to the schools because of all the different states have very similar laws. They're all copying each other to get more money, and we know this. They're having to write, that school district had to write a check for the same amount that they got from the lottery, send it back to the state, which put it in the general fund, which the money wasn't supposed to go to the general fund. It was supposed to go to the schools. So there would be in a very large number of states that have lotteries. If there was a bill that actually mandated that the states give the money where it's supposed to go. But instead, it's the lottery money comes in, and the money that the state had to send the school districts go right back, not for what it was meant to go to. Have you heard of anything that's being done about this? Because it's been 38 years we've had that lottery. My family member 30 some years before she retired from the school district just a few years ago. And every single time the check came in, she had to send that exact amount of money back to the state for the general fund.
So yeah, it's a great issue. Again, more of a state issue than a federal issue, but I can actually talk knowledgeably about this because this was something I was involved in at the state level. I used to sit on what we call JLAC, the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, and we did a couple of different audits to the way that lottery money was being used for schools. And the facts that you presented, the mechanics are wrong, and I'll explain that in a second. But the underlying logic that you've laid out, that's exactly what happens. And here's why. In the state of California, we have a constitutional amendment that requires a certain percentage of state revenues, which includes lottery revenues, to go to the schools. So the lottery money, I mean, it's legit. That money, the portion that they say is supposed to go to schools, and we in the legislature pushed back a couple of different times to try and to get them to raise that percentage. But that money does actually go to schools. But the problem is that when the state budget sees an increase in the amount of lottery money going to schools, that triggers an automatic decrease in state general fund revenue that goes to supporting schools. So the net result to schools is that they haven't benefited from the presence of the lottery, because even though the lottery brought them more money, the state gave them less money as a result. So the total amount was the same. And that's something that I think is a travesty. I think that if people knew about that, more people knew about that, they would demand a change in the way that lottery revenue was accounted for. I think that should be supplemental. It should be on top of the money that the state government is already providing to schools. But that's something I've been fighting for the last 7 years. Unfortunately, we have not been able to get it through. All we can do is to keep talking about it and raising public awareness of it, as you have done. So thank you for the question, Mary. All right, going next to Wes from Hesperia. Wes, what can I answer for you?
Yeah, hi, Congressman. Thank you so much. First of all, let me ask a question, and then I've got a comment that I'd like to make, and then you can answer the question, please. What are we doing about getting jobs back from China and India and all the other countries that do not have the same views of fairness in the country, in dealing with our economies and stuff? My goal is to work with American companies to help these jobs to get jobs. So let me ask you, what are we going to be doing about that? And also, let me just make a comment. I'm an inventor and the president of my company, and I've got 82 patent applications currently in process. I have some worldwide commerce applications that include building homes that are 20% less cost than a regular conventional home. That's something that is going to have a real big impact in housing. We're going to put together new design in automobiles that are lighter and more fuel efficient, and we've got a railroad system. And we're going to be building some new lightweight cargo containers. So now, if you would, please help me on what is happening with the job situation for Americans.
Sure. No, it's a great question. Also something I'm very concerned about. Unfortunately, in recent years, we have been moving the wrong direction with respect to job creation here in this country. And if you want proof of that, look at what we were talking about just a few minutes ago when we were talking about the jobs report from December. And the fact that real wages have decreased by 2.4% in the last year. Think about what that means from a standpoint of job creation, because when we are offering people in real dollars less money this year than we did last year to do their work, we're going to get a lower labor participation rate, and we're going to see more and more of those jobs flee overseas. So what we can do about it, we need to, first of all, reverse the failed economic policies that have gotten us to where we are. And we need to return to policies that incentivize job creation here and catalyze the growth of small businesses, which, small businesses employ over 50% of the workers in our economy right now. The big businesses are the ones that you hear about in the news. Small businesses are actually the ones that are creating the most jobs. And we need to make sure that those jobs are created here. And if you look at the things that government has done in the last year to disincentivize job creation, it can be very, very depressing, particularly in the state of California. This is something that, as an entrepreneur myself, I still run actually a small business. I've got 29 employees, and I don't think it would be possible for me to start that business now, today, with the current regulatory environment that we have. It would just be too hard. I started out in my dorm room at Caltech, and I didn't have the resources to find out about wage and labor laws. And we've got AB5 now here in California that makes it so that you're not allowed to use contract labor. You have to have people as employees, which means you got to worry about all the different record keeping and the responsibilities that come along with that. It's so hard. So that's thing number 2 we can do, is to study the policies that are successful in catalyzing the growth of job creation here and return to the era when we were encouraging that kind of investment. But thanks very much for the question. Very important topic. And let's see, we're coming up at the top of the hour here, so I want to be respectful of people's time. So I'm going to take our last question. But if we didn't get to your question, because we still have a fair number in queue, if we didn't get to your question, please, after this call ends, after the Teletone call ends, there'll be a recording, and you please leave me the question, and I will respond to your question. I will respond to every single piece of constituent communication, regardless of what it comes from, and it's great that we had so many questions, but we only had an hour to get through them here. So, last question, Dennis from Running Springs. Dennis, what can I answer for you?
Hi, thank you very much for taking my question. I was actually thinking I wasn't going to get in, but I appreciate it. My question is why does it seem that why does it seem to be such a pathetic effort being made to mitigate what's going on the southern border here? And not only that, but the administration seems to be taking liberties in ways that they never have before. I mean, this thing with the busing, many illegal, males, no family members. These people should be bussed out, or I should say sent back to where they came from, and yet they're not. All these Afghanistans that they brought in, Afghanis that they brought in, many of them not vetted. And I mean, we're talking over 100,000 of those people alone. And then, what happened last year? We're looking at probably 2 million people that we know of, and that's not counting the ones that we never interdicted. So, I mean, this is just unbelievable. I cannot believe that we are this anemic in this response. And I'd like to know what the
Okay, well, I don't hear you anymore, Dennis, but it was a great question, and let me answer it. I also think it's tragic how little attention is being paid to the crisis at the southern border, and I think part of it is that it's been something that was reported on a lot when it started a year ago. It's still been going on, and I kind of think that maybe the administration hopes that this problem is just going to go away, that people are going to forget about it. I think it's clear that that's absolutely not the case. I also think it's important that we realize that our broken immigration system is what's catalyzed this whole problem and politicized the issue. It's something that reasonable minds can disagree about how much immigration we should allow and what the rules should be. But one thing we should all be able to agree on is that we are a nation that respects the rule of law. So if we want to change the law, then we need to have a discussion as a society and as a Congress and come up with some solutions. But what is absolutely unacceptable is for us to condone the breaking of the law. And what is absolutely unacceptable is for us to violate our national sovereignty by failing to enforce our border security. So that's something that we will continue to push for here in Congress because just it is such an important kind of existential problem for our country. And, for the 8th Congressional District, the failure to protect our southern border is having direct consequences for us here. You heard me talk at our last telephone town hall. For those of you who were here, I was talking about the crisis with illegal cannabis cultivation in our deserts. We've got thousands of illegal grows. Our county sheriffs are finally doing a great job with some federal resources and their own resources. They're doing a great job in trying to crack down on that. But it still is a problem, and that's that and the fentanyl, the human trafficking. That is all a direct result of what's going on at the southern border. So it's something that I'm going to continue to push for getting fixed, and it's something that we all need to raise public awareness of. Well, I want to thank you very much for your civic participation in participating in our teletown hall. This was the 5th of these. We're going to continue doing them even as we ramp up our in-person town hall schedule for this year. So we'll definitely have them in the future. If you didn't get your question answered, again, please stay on the line. Leave your information and your question, and I will respond. Or you can always reach out to me through a call to my district office or my capital office, through an email. You can reach us through there's a contact form on our website, which is obernolte.house.gov. Spell the last name however you want to. Google will point you in the right direction, and you can fill out that contact form. Direct message me on any of the social media platforms. I respond to every single constituent communication. In fact, I think we did about almost 20,000 of them of responses last year. I'm sure that the number is going to be even more this year. Again, if you want to sign up for our newsletter, please press *6 on your phone. We'll take your information and you can get signed up. And also, please follow me on social media, any of the platforms, whatever the platform of your choice is. We will keep you updated with information from Washington, D.C. Also, I should mention that we tried an experiment tonight. We are live streaming this. So the next telephone town hall, if you want to watch with video, you can do that through my website at obernolte.house.gov or through Facebook. It's worked pretty well here, so I think we're going to be doing that again in the future. So again, thank you very much for participating in our telephone town hall. It's an honor to represent you in Washington, D.C., and I hope to see you again in a telephone town hall in the future. Good night, everyone.